Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. Thank you for taking time out to be here today. And I also just want to put a special thank you out to those of you who have taken time to head on over to iTunes and leave reviews. There's been some really incredible reviews lately, which of course makes me feel really great about the podcast, and that just confirms that the work is landing and that people are appreciating it. But remember, those reviews also help people to find the podcast. So anyway, thank you for those of you who've taken the time. And if you're someone who has frequently listened to the podcast and you think it's worthy of a review, I would definitely appreciate you heading on over to iTunes and just taking a couple minutes out of your day to rate and review the podcast. Now, we have been talking all month long about self-leadership because let's face it, change is hard. And change is hard because it demands a really high level of self-leadership. And self-leadership takes a lot to develop, which is what we've been focusing all month long. We've kind of broken this concept of self-leadership into 6 parts. In week 1, we talked about self-respect, the importance of it. In week 2, we talked about the value of self-awareness and self-development. Last week, I shared with you reasons why self-management is so imperative. And this week, I want to talk about the space between grace and grit, which to me is really the last 2 pillars of self-leadership, which is self-discipline and self-compassion. It is the marriage of self-discipline and self-compassion through which we birth the best possible versions of ourselves. At least that's how I operate as a coach. That's how I operate as a woman. I am a champion for residing in that beautiful space between self-compassion and self-discipline, which of course is why I named my company Grace and Grit. Grace being the self-compassion, grit being the self-discipline. One without the other, I really believe will cage what is possible for your life. Now, I love Google's definition of self-discipline. It says this: self-discipline is the ability to control one's feelings and overcome one's weaknesses. It is the ability to pursue what one thinks is right despite temptations to abandon it. I got to read it one more time. So again, self-discipline is the ability to control one's feelings and overcome one's weaknesses. It is the ability to pursue what one thinks is right, despite temptations to abandon it. I love that. And I got to tell you, just recording this podcast today took me a lot of discipline. I believe this podcast needs to be out in the world. Therefore, I believe it's right. And there's a lot of reasons and temptations to abandon it at times because it's not easy. It costs me a lot of time, money, and energy to do this podcast, which I am more than happy to do because I believe it's serving women. But this morning, I got to tell you, it's 4:30 on a Friday morning, and I am sitting in my husband's truck in the driveway to record this podcast. And I can tell you all the reasons why it had to happen this way this morning. But all you really need to know is that I could have easily abandoned it, right? I could have rationalized my way out of the fact that I just can't produce a podcast this week. But because I'm so committed to it, because I feel like it's so right and so important, I am controlling my feelings about what it takes to produce it. And I'm sitting in the car, in the driveway, happily recording it. Let's talk about self-compassion for a second. What is self-compassion? So Dr. Kristen Neff is widely recognized as one of the world's leading experts on self-compassion. And I love what she has to say about self-compassion. She says this: self-compassion involves acting the same way towards yourself when you're having a difficult time, fail, or noticing something you don't like about yourself. Instead of just ignoring your pain with a stiff upper lip mentality, you stop to tell yourself, this is really difficult right now. How can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? Instead of mercilessly judging and criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means that you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. I am in the process right now of kind of growing pains with my business. The business has really grown leaps and bounds since I moved online 7 years ago. I can't believe it's been almost 7 years, by the way. And I'm definitely in a space of pushing my business to the next level. And I gotta tell you, it's really hard and it's really scary. And holy cow, has there been a tremendous amount of self-doubt. And I really have had so much opportunity to extend self-compassion to myself, because there's just been a lot of sticky moments where my feelings kind of want to get the best of me, where, again, like I said, there's that self-doubt, or there's things that I have to start learning that I really just don't understand as well. And in those moments, and I think it's largely because of the work that I have done over the past 20 years, I've learned how to breathe into it. And I remind myself how far I have come and how many things I have already had to figure out. And I really do apply a very hefty dose of self-compassion, which keeps me moving forward. Now, as a health coach, I have seen women manipulate the idea of self-compassion into rationalizing why they shouldn't have to apply the self-discipline that will help them get happier or healthier. And conversely, I have witnessed many women, as I'm sure you have, use self-discipline to the point of self-destruction because they clearly lack compassion for themselves. And I just want to say right here, right now, your health, your peace, your happiness are waiting for you in that space between self-compassion and self-discipline. It's like the most fertile soil for growth is in that space in the middle, meaning it requires both. This is not an either-or conversation. Do I need self-compassion? Do I need self-discipline? Every woman needs both self-compassion and self-discipline to find that sweet spot where they can grow and flourish and progress in a really healthy way. And ultimately, where a woman can kind of make peace with how she takes care of herself. You have to get dirty to change your story, any part of your story. If there's something about in your life right now that you don't love, you will have to get dirty to change it. And what do I mean by getting dirty? I mean, you have to be okay with wading through a really messy middle, as Brene Brown would say. I love that idea of a messy middle because gosh darn it, I mean, that middle feels really freaking messy when you're in the thick of change. The messy middle is when you decide to change the things in your life that are not serving the life you said you wanted to live. The messy middle is where you feel unskilled and uncomfortable. And for many women, when they stand in the messy middle, when they find themselves there, that is precisely when they start to judge and blame and shame themselves. When we face the parts of ourselves that aren't so lovely or skilled or just need a little bit of TLC, we lay it on thick, right? We lay that judge, that blame, and that shame on very thickly, which causes us actually to hide rather than heal. So we retreat from change rather than leaning into it. When you risk showing up for yourself in new ways, when you risk stepping out of your comfort zone, this I know for sure, you're going to screw up. You're going to fail often and much. And this is why self-compassion is so damn important. Self-compassion, in my opinion, is like, it's a friend. It's like the friend that holds your hand in the middle of the mess, right? The friend that holds your hand in the dark. The friend that reminds you how awesome and capable and deserving you really are. The friend that stays with you as long as you need her to. Here's even the harder truth for women to accept. Self-discipline is a friend too. But self-discipline is the friend that calls you out when you're playing small and settling for less than you deserve and less than you wanted for your life. Self-discipline insists that you rationalize and compromise less. And you show up to do the work a lot more often. Because when you do, when you show up for yourself more often, and you lean into the discomfort of changing the parts of your life that you're not that satisfied with, you are introduced to really the magnitude of your strength and the vastness of your possibility. And I hear a lot of women using language like, I'm just not disciplined, which I think is a total story that women are telling themselves. Of course you're disciplined. It takes discipline to get up every morning and go to a job. It takes discipline, a lot of discipline, to take care of your children all the time. It takes discipline to stay in a marriage when it's just really, looking a little rough around the edges. There's a lot of things in your life that you have been disciplined about. Why not you? Why should showing yourself, like applying that discipline to yourself, for yourself, be any different? I really believe that every woman, and this is largely, I feel like, the meat of my work, every woman needs to learn for herself how to answer the question, do I need a little more grit right now? Or do I need a little bit more grace? Do I need a little more self-discipline? Do I need a little more self-compassion? And how can I apply self-compassion even as I'm leaning in to self-discipline. This is the inner work that I always talk about. It's inner work because no one can answer those questions for you. No one can ever really know if you need to lean into that discipline, into that grit, or if the really healthy answer in that moment is for you to back off. That's between you and you. Only you know the answers to those questions. And bringing those answers into the light requires a very deep level of honesty with yourself. So where do you begin? Where do you begin to start developing more self-compassion and more self-discipline? Well, as for self-compassion, you practice. Everything's a practice. You practice being nice to yourself, especially when it isn't easy and when you don't feel worthy. Because the hard truth, my friends, is you are always worthy. But you have to believe it, which is why that first pillar of self-leadership is self-respect. If you don't have self-respect, you are going to have such a difficult time applying self-compassion and self-discipline from a healthy space. I know for me, a big thing that I had to practice in my attempt to develop my self-compassion, and this is still a practice, by the way, I have in no way mastered this, but I've had to practice softening. Naraya Waid is a poet. She's written 2 books that have the same title called Salt. I post a lot of her stuff on Instagram for those of you who follow me. And she just has an amazing way of speaking hard truths with just a few words. But she says this about softening. You don't have to be a fire for every mountain blocking you. You could be water and soft river your way to freedom too. I'm going to read it one more time because I think a lot of you need to hear this. You do not have to be a fire for every mountain blocking you. You could be water and soft river your way to freedom too. And to me, that speaks directly to self-compassion. You don't have to hustle all the time. You don't have to do more all the time. You don't have to be so hard on yourself. What if you could be nice to yourself and still accomplish all the things that you do in life? In fact, I would say accomplish even more because you're being nice to yourself, because you can, but you have to practice. Self-compassion or grace looks like when you're failing, when you trip up, when you take a sidestep, you say things to yourself like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to regroup, I'm going to realign, and I'm going to try again tomorrow. It sounds an awful like saying to yourself, that's okay. It's okay that this happened. I can see what it taught me. I can see how I'm going to move forward from this a little more wisely. Or it might sound like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why I did that. So when you go to the party and you had the best of intentions of, making good choices, but you ended up drinking several glasses of alcohol and kind of going overboard with the not such great choices there. It's not an exercise in judgment, the aftermath. It doesn't need to be. It could be an exercise in curiosity. I wonder why I did that. And I guarantee if you answer that question, I wonder why I did that, and you really get to the root of some of those answers, that is going to be powerful material for you to move forward. Self-compassion looks like saying things to yourself like, I owe it to myself to try again. Or asking yourself, what does self-care look like right now? Because here's the thing, ladies, self-care does not always look like another workout or cutting your calories or trying the latest diet craze or removing an entire food group. Those things can be healthy if you're making the decision with the right intentions behind them. But healthy things can also turn toxic very quickly, depending on why you are applying them and when you're applying them. And I'll use exercise as an example. I have clients who they're not feeling well, or they haven't slept in days, or they're going through kind of a crisis in their life. And they continue to push really, really hard in their workouts and wonder why they're feeling like hell. Remember, exercise is a stressor. It can be a beautiful stressor, but it can also be a distressor if you are not judicious about when you're applying it. Self-compassion also looks like giving yourself permission to draw smaller circles, permission to rest, permission to evolve, get out of the box, set boundaries. And the really kind of ironic thing is, it often requires a bit of grit to allow yourself grace. That's been 100% true for me. Grace is not, I don't want to say it's not my nature, because I do believe it's my nature. But I think life kind of got me away from my nature. And so I've had to reteach myself how to tap into grace. It's been a more challenging exercise than the grit side of things. Grit comes more easily. And I would say that most women that I come across would agree with that grit comes a little bit easier. I have never, not ever, met a woman who couldn't benefit from developing more grace with herself. We often think that health is an exercise in addition, but I often argue with women that I believe that health in many cases is an exercise in subtraction. Now, when I talk about self-discipline, I hope you understand by now, if you have followed this podcast for any length of time, or even from what I've said on the podcast so far today, the kind that I want you to nurture, the self-discipline I am speaking directly to, is the self-discipline you administer in tribute to the respect and love you ultimately have for yourself and for your life. I'm not talking about self-discipline from a space of self-loathing. I'm talking about self-discipline from a space of self-liking, which again is why that first pillar of self-leadership, of a self-leadership model, is so important: self-respect. So we talked a little bit about what self-compassion looks like. Let's talk about what self-discipline looks like along the process to change, or what grit looks like. In my opinion, it looks like admitting when you have made a habit out of negotiating, compromising, and rationalizing your way out of self-care. Because let's face it, ladies, that's ultimately what gets us into a lot of trouble, is that we compromise, rationalize, and negotiate way too much, and it just becomes a habit. Self-discipline looks like following through oftentimes when you don't feel like it. Now, I'm not saying following through when you're deathly ill, or following through when there's a crisis in your life, or following through when you've twisted your ankle. I'm talking about following through when you put the darn thing on your calendar, and then when it finally shows up, you're like, don't really feel like it right now. That's where self-discipline needs to be called to the table. Because really, if the thing that you're trying to achieve on the other side of the thing that you scheduled in your calendar is really that important to you, it shouldn't matter how you feel in that moment. Show up. Self-discipline or grit looks like getting out of your comfort zone often and much. And oh man, we don't like doing that as adults. I get it. But change doesn't happen. Growth doesn't happen. We all know this. It's, the self-help industry is saturated with this idea. You got to get out of your comfort zone. Yeah, you do. You have to feel unskilled. You have to feel a little bit ungrounded at times. You have to feel like there's a little bit of self-questioning. Like there's a little bit of, I hate to say struggle because I really feel like struggle is optional. But sometimes struggle is that sign of something new being born. And that happens quite often in the change process. Discipline looks like befriending resistance, right? Learning a new skill, having some resistance to it because you're not so good at it, but actually continuing to do the thing exactly because you're not good at it. That's what I mean by befriending resistance. Grit looks like showing up day in and day out because you have so much self-respect for yourself. And I'll tell you a really simple place to start with self-discipline. And this drives some of my clients crazy. When they first come in to work with me, they're like, they're so ready to take on more. Because that is how the diet and fitness industry has conditioned us as women. It's always about adding more intensity, more rules, more regulations, more supplements, right? And often I will start clients by saying, I want you to choose one 5-minute action step that you are willing to show up for every single day this week. And you know what women say to me all the time? It's not hard enough. To which my response is, that's awesome. Because if it's not hard enough, if you think it's too easy, you should have 0 reasons for not following through. And what do you think happens at the end of that week when I actually talk to people again? How many people do you think have been compliant with their little 5-minute action step that they committed to for themselves? I got to tell you, it's a lot less than you would think, right? These women who were so wrapped up in this idea that it's too easy didn't show up for themselves for 5 minutes a day. So why do I start there? Because I know that if you can start, the 5-minute action is simply a practice of starting to show up for yourself on a consistent basis. And it sounds really easy. But you know what? Easy is what gets us in trouble. Because easy to do is also easy not to do. Health is not as complicated as we're making it. Right? Eat more vegetables, eat whole foods, move your body, get some sleep, drink some water. These are not challenging concepts. But it's almost like we don't want to believe that it can be easy. We believe it should be harder, it should be more complex, that we need more. We need to set the bar really high. And all that does is create a tremendous amount of resistance. So what is one small action that you could commit to this week? When I say small action, I'm going to tell you 5 minutes. If it takes you longer than 5 minutes, you are overcommitting. One thing you are dedicating to improving your health story this week that takes no more than 5 minutes, that you are fiercely committed to showing up for every single day this week. Try it on. Let me know how you do. You can always text me, or not text me, but email me at Courtney@graceandgrit.com. And I want to remind you one more time, because we are coming down to the wire with the doors for the signature program closing. So once again, the signature program is my 6-month signature program for Grace and Grit, where I will work very closely with you for 6 months to develop a very sturdy foundation of self-care, self-compassion, self-discipline, all the things that we've been talking about in regards to self-leadership in the health arena. And I have some incredible testimonials from this last round of students that just wrapped up. And I am going to play one of those testimonials here in just a second. But I also want to let you know that if you go into the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community, which is a free community on Facebook, you can also get access to all the other testimonials. And if you go to graceandgrit.com, actually /SP testimonials, again, graceandgrit.com/SP testimonials, you will see like a ton of audio files that you can play that are all of these testimonials that I've been playing at the end of the podcast to get a better sense of what this experience is like. You could also book a free call with me if you're just really kind of wanting, you need to book a free call with me if you want to register for this program, because it's just a part of the registration process that we speak on the phone together. So you can do that by going to graceandgrit.com/kickstart. If all of that's confusing to you, you can always email me, Courtney@graceandgrit.com. So sit tight and enjoy this interview with my fabulous client. And thank you for being here today. I hope it landed. I hope it resonated. I hope it helps you to move forward this week, being a little nicer to yourself, and especially being a little nicer to yourself as you become more self-disciplined, because that's where the magic happens. Marrying the self-compassion with the self-discipline. All right, my friends, have a great day. Thank you so much for being here. I'll talk to you soon. So my client, Amy Marshall, who's been working with me through the Signature program for the past 6 months, has graciously agreed to come onto the show today and talk to us a little bit about her experience of working with me. Amy, first of all, welcome and thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I would love for you to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, like who you are, kind of what your life is made up of right now. Let's just start there.
Sure. Yeah. So I am, I'll tell my age. I don't mind. I'm 40 years old. I am a mother of two. I have a husband at home. I have a very robust career. I'm a nurse practitioner and I teach nurse practitioners and also maintain a clinical job. So my career is a big part of who I am, as is my family. And that's really how I ended up here with Courtney, because I realized that I was lacking in including myself in my own life and caring for myself. I was taking such good care of my career, and I recently completed a doctorate, and my children are now like 10 and 11, and they're healthy and doing well, and my family is good. So it was really kind of time to take care of myself.
I love that. Last time I spoke to you a week ago, I think you had said it. You said, I finally realized that I matter.
Yes, very much so. And I should have realized that quite a long time ago, because
well, it's easy in the whirlwind of life, right?
Right. Like, it just took me like 20 years to figure that out, but better late than never.
Yeah. And I know we've talked a lot about this too, that it's interesting in the medical profession, right? That like medicine has done so many wonders for people's health. And yet at the same time, self-care is definitely in many ways lacking in the medical space, because you work really hard and you work crazy hours, and it can be conflicting a little bit.
Yeah. And I also feel like, we talk, in nursing, oftentimes we talk about self-care, but I think there's also a misperception about what that actually means, and I think even when I started this program, I had a certain amount of misperception myself about what that would look like for me. I feel like we're, so often trained to okay, are we exercising? Are we having a healthy diet? But it's really there's so much more to that, like sleep and emotions. And there's so many other pieces to it that really make such an important component of self-care.
So you came into the program because you were feeling what? Just kind of
totally frustrated. I just felt like I was nonstop go, go, go. And I just felt like my body was not supporting me through that, and I was really just at this total level of frustration. And I just didn't really know. I listened to your podcast for a while, so I definitely knew that your message spoke to me, and so that really compelled me to, move forward with coaching with you. And I also heard some of your other people that you've coached in the past talk about their experiences, and that resonated with me too. So I kind of felt like this was the direction I wanted to go. I knew I didn't just want to go down cookie cutter type ways, which I've done in the past. I've certainly done a fair number of those types of programs, and I was still there. I was still frustrated. So I knew I needed something different. I didn't really know what that looked like, but I knew that your message really kind of sat with me. So that's why I went forward with you.
What do you think specifically spoke to you? Like, what about the message do you think specifically compelled you to do the work?
Really that you have a strong message in your podcast around, that there's that it's not just the typical diet and exercise culture. There's way more to that. And it shouldn't be what we're all following. We shouldn't all be following the same meal plans or the same exercise habits. We're not the same. And so you really kind of bring in a lot of different people that have different experiences, and, just kind of listening to all those different people tackle their own lives in different ways, kind of helped me understand that I needed to make my own path. This was my own path for improving my health.
It's so true. Making your own path it's everything. Yeah. I would say in terms of finding joy in the discipline of following your path, right? It's really important that you create the path. Yeah. And also in terms of sustainability, that if we want to maintain this work, that we're taking, and the way in which we're taking care of ourselves, we really need to enjoy it and feel like it is cultivated specifically for our life.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And I think, one of the early habits that was through the database and that we talked about was eating slowly. And it sounds so simple. And when I first read it, I was like, this is ridiculous. What are you talking about? But I realized the first time I actually paid attention, I was like, I just scarfed my meal down, and my family's still sitting there eating. And I'm like, this is crazy. So then I really, made an effort to slow down and actually enjoy the food and enjoy my company. And I realized there's this whole world going on, and I don't have to rush through everything, So, this whole exercise of coaching has been about slowing down and paying attention to what's going on in my life and how am I structuring my life so that I can enjoy the things that I value,
And how are you responding to life? Because a lot of us are just reacting. We're not responding.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, and we talked about it last week on last week's call. I had a lot of stuff going on at work. I was in school. I have a family, and prior to starting coaching, I would say that my irritability was pretty high, and the other day, it was definitely tested. My son lost his musical instrument, which, if you've ever paid for them, they're not cheap. And it would have easily 6 months ago, I would have just blown a lid and freaked out. And I was just, I didn't even find myself wanting to do that. I was just so calm about it. And I said, okay, I understand. And I stayed calm. And I think he was waiting to see if I was going to blow or not. And I didn't. And I personally was just really proud of myself and the fact that I have enough presence now to really, not get irritable and as irritable as I have been. I mean, of course I still get mad sometimes, but I'm definitely more present and more, better able to handle some of the stressors that come my way that are unexpected,
Yeah. Which is a big win. I think that's an understated win in a lot of ways, because we always see the before and after pictures, and it's all about your fitness level and it's all about how clean your diet is. But oh my gosh, to feel like you have emotional control over yourself, is so powerful.
Yeah, very much so. I feel I just feel like my time is better aligned with my values than it has been from when I started coaching.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. So for any women listening who may not really understand the value of working with a health coach, how would you describe this work? Because I always ask this question because I think in the age of health coaching, right? I mean, there's just so many variations of health coaching. And so I don't think people really know what it means. And of course, even if they know what one version of health coaching means, it doesn't necessarily apply to all health coaches. Right. So how would you maybe describe this work, or what would you say to a woman who was trying to better understand it?
So I feel like my time with you and this work has been very personalized to me. So you don't enter this space of coaching with you and get, you're not getting a meal plan. You're not getting like this, what you should do from 9 a.m. in the morning until 9 at night. But what you do is you challenge the person, me, to think about what am I doing in my schedule and my life. And if movement is a value of mine, well, where is it? Where is it in my schedule? And why is it not there? And, what is taking up your schedule? And I mean, to work with you, you have to be able to be honest with yourself. And really, there's definitely some truths like I didn't want to necessarily hear or come up with.
Right.
But, you're pretty upfront about it. And I appreciate that, like your famous statement, I feel like you've said to me many different times is like, well, how's that working for you? And sometimes you don't want to like hit that reality, but that's the reality you need to hit in order to move past it and grow from it. So I feel like you've been able to allow me to see these truths about where I was spending my time and how it was like misaligned with my values and for in my own health. And then how do I realign that, and that's really what these 6 months has been about. So it was very tailored to my experience and what I needed over those 6 months.
Yeah. And I love that word realignment, because I do feel like that is what it is. It's realignment. And the only way you can get realigned is by doing that inner work, which is what we were talking about before we started recording. You kept using that word introspection and that it is the inner work that matters most.
Yeah. Yeah. And it definitely, it's not easy,
I know.
At all.
But nothing that matters in life is, right? Having kids isn't easy. Having a career isn't easy.
Correct.
But you love it.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes the things, not sometimes, but I think oftentimes the things that bring you the most reward and happiness are the things that are the most challenging things, and that's part of the journey. So I'm just grateful for the journey. I really feel like I'm in so much better place in terms of caring for my health and aligning it with how I want it to be and being satisfied at the end of each day, with how I take care of myself. And granted, I do have days that aren't perfect by any means. Well, no day is perfect, but, I'll have days where I fall off of what I want or what's intended. And then I don't like fall off forever. I'm like, okay, just chill. Like you had a crappy dinner. Oh, well, it's one dinner. No big deal. Go to bed like you normally do. Wake up in the morning like you normally do. Eat a good, healthy breakfast, whatever. And so that's also been really helpful too, is like, not taking everything so negatively for days, when you do something wrong, like, oh, well, who cares? It's just noticing what you do and like how to self-correct,
Well, which is really that all or nothing mentality, right? Like if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all, which I think is many women are in the habit of that all or nothing mentality. And I think that's a really important thing to shed if you want to make progress, because any change worth making is going to be really messy. Like messy in that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to make other choices that aren't necessarily in line with what you said you wanted, and you learn from those things.
Yeah.
I'd love you to speak a little bit too, because we were talking about this also before we started recording, about the difference between moving, like taking care of yourself from a space of self-loathing versus taking care of yourself from a place of self-respect.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say, and I remember like maybe in our very first like coaching call where I was seeing whether you were a fit for me, I talked a little bit about how, I found myself, I had a lot of negative self-talk, and I'm not someone I don't consider myself someone who has crappy self-esteem, but like I could definitely like look at myself in the mirror in the morning and go, oh God, like look at that fat roll, or, oh, these pants look horrible, or, it was like daily, it was like infiltrated my life, and that was kind of how I grew up for a lot of years. And, through my work with you, like I realized that that's not serving me in any way at all. So I changed it, and it's a work in progress because I've had, roughly 25 years or so to perfect that negative self-talk. But now I'm aware of it. And so like when I feel myself going down that road from a habit, I just stop, and I don't do that anymore. I stop myself before I get to that point. Doesn't mean like I start to think about it, but like, I just know it's not serving me. No, I'm not gonna criticize myself in the mirror. That's absolutely ridiculous. Like, no, I don't give a crap what size my pants are right now. Like, I really don't care. That's a big step, and I realize that I have a lot of work to do with that, but I just feel like, because I don't, I think it's all helped. I think the self-care that I've incorporated in my life is just more caring for myself. And I just think that negativity doesn't have any place in that,
Yeah. And and as by way of that, because you have no place for negativity, it's not serving you, it does get easier to take care of yourself more consistently because you want to.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not
coming from a place of hate. Like, oh, I see my fat roll. Let me go exercise an hour. Like, That's not it at all. My exercise now comes from, well, I know that I feel really good, and like it helps keep my mental health in a good place, and my I physically feel better. And that's why I want to exercise. It's not because I'm worried about my fat rolls. Yeah.
And I just want to say here, like Amy is specifically going through some big emotional stuff right now with her family. And the word that she keeps using the past few sessions we've had together is that she just feels like her health is so manageable, even given this really stressful situation. And I feel like that, to me, is such an indicator that great work has been done, because you're not just going to wipe your self-care off your plate because of these other stressors that are showing up in your life. It's all the more reason to take care of yourself so you can be fully present for your family.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been an asset to be able to actually figure that out.
Yeah,
right. Ability way better than it's ever been. And, I definitely have some significant stressors within my family. And, I've learned to just kind of sit with that and not just be reactive and emotional. And I'm certainly emotional at times, don't get me wrong, but, it's within a context, and I'm able to deal with what's coming at us. And it's not always the easiest stuff, but, I find that, as long as I keep my anchors and through the program, I've learned what those anchors are for me, for my health and my self-care, and everybody's, I'm sure, a little different. But those, I just go back to them all the time,
Which is the name of the game. It's just knowing your anchors. And like you said, when you sidestep, when you have that dinner that maybe wasn't totally in line with what you want to do for yourself, the next morning, you know how to get back on track because you have a plan for yourself and you have a lay of the land of what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. Is there anything else you want to share?
No, I mean, I think I'm just so grateful for my time with you. And I think that, if you're someone who's like on the fence, or maybe you've heard Courtney or you've listened to the podcast or whatever, and some of the content resonates with you, like that's where I started. I started from that place, and I can't even imagine if I continued on that path I don't even know. Like, I'm so grateful that I'm where I am now. And I just feel like I'm so much more aligned with being at peace with how I live my life and the choices that I make, and aligning my life with the values that I have. So, I mean, that's like unbelievable that
that's
I get
so
to
cool.
say that.
That's so cool.
And I know it's a lifelong journey. So I recognize that. And that's also taken me a little to understand that.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's taken me a little. I feel like you always think there's like a quick fix, but it's lifelong. And I'm very happy and at peace with where I am and the journey that I've had. So thank you.
I love that. Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge that, I feel like I'm just kind of a guide along the journey, and I could very easily give exactly the same information and same coaching to two different people. And one person could take passive action, which is just they read the books, they listen to the podcast, they look at the worksheets, but they don't ever really apply it. And then there's people who take massive action, which are the people who really say, okay, this is what we talked about on our call today. So this is what I'm committed to following through with this week, and just trying it on to see how it works.
Right.
And that is 150% who you were through your process, which is why you were able to come out on the other side in the way that you did. Yeah. And that's everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important thing to remember moving forward, because in so many places in our life that we want to improve, passive action is just so easy. It's so easy to consume information, but what are you actually doing with the information?
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I am so grateful for you coming on and sharing your experience. I'm sure that landed for many people listening. And it was just a nothing but pleasure to work with you.
Oh, same here, Courtney. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.